What would you do if a single button could destroy a life? Norma Lewis had lived quietly, unnoticed, but beneath the calm exterior lay years of betrayal and quiet resentment. When a mysterious stranger delivered a black box with a single, red button, Norma was offered more than money. She was given a chance to confront the darkness she had carried all her life. This is a true story of revenge, moral testing, and the terrifying power of choice. Watch as one woman's decision unleashes consequences she could never have imagined, and discover the chilling truth that some buttons, once pressed, can never be unpressed. Will she find justice, or will the cost of vengeance consume her? Rain hammered against the windows like impatient fingers, drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof of the Lewis home. Inside, the house was still, too still. A single lamp cast a pool of pale light across the living room, illuminating the faint outlines of furniture she'd grown accustomed to ignoring. Norma Lewis sat on the edge of the sofa, knees tucked against her chest, staring at the muted glow of the television that no one had bothered to turn on. Her fingers traced the seam of the fabric absent-mindedly, leaving faint smudges in the velvet. She could hear the distant hum of her husband's car engine outside, the sound of him returning from another day of work that mattered more than she did. Arthur never spoke of the small betrayals, the quiet fractures in their marriage. He moved around her house like it belonged to him alone, leaving traces of his presence, cups, newspapers, the faint scent of aftershave, but never truly noticing her. Norma had imagined confronting him many times. She pictured herself standing in the kitchen, the rain streaking the windows behind her, and finally speaking truths she had swallowed for years. But reality always seemed thinner than her imagination, and words dissolved in her throat like smoke. A sudden knock on the door made her flinch. The sound was precise, deliberate, almost unnatural. She glanced toward the hallway. "Who is it?" she called, her voice catching. No answer. Only the faint echo of rain and the distant rattle of a loose shutter. Norma rose slowly, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself were aware of the tension in the air. She peered through the peephole. A man stood there. Tall, straight-backed, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed too perfect, too deliberate. His eyes, pale and unblinking, held a calm that made her chest tighten. "Mrs. Lewis?" His voice was smooth, measured, and without any trace of fear. Norma hesitated. "Yes, can I help you?" He produced a small leather case from his hand, opening it with deliberate care. Inside was a black box, small, elegant, almost ordinary, but the red button on its surface caught the light, glowing faintly, insistent. A note rested beside it, folded neatly like a promise and a threat. "You have a choice," he said. "One action. One consequence. No one else will know. No one else will suffer but the one you choose, or the one who is chosen for you." Norma's heartbeat quickened, a mix of fear, curiosity, and a strange, thrilling pulse she hadn't felt in years. Arthur's face flickered in her mind, smug, unrepentant, utterly unknowing of the quiet storm building behind her eyes. Memories of betrayals past rose unbidden, the embezzled savings, the humiliations, the nights spent in a hollow silence she couldn't share. I don't understand," she whispered, though a part of her understood perfectly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned against the doorway, calm as a shadow. "The question is not whether you understand. The question is whether you act." Norma swallowed hard, feeling the rain's rhythm sync with the thrum of her pulse. The house around her seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her first move. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Norma felt that strange, dangerous spark of power, of choice, flicker inside her, a spark that promised everything and nothing all at once. The man straightened, closing the case with a snap. "Decide when you are ready. But know this, every choice leaves a mark. Even the unseen ones." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Norma alone, staring at the black box as rain traced invisible rivers down the glass. Her hands hovered over the red button. And in that hovering, a lifetime of silent fury and hidden longing whispered back at her. Norma left the black box on the coffee table, her hands trembling slightly as if it had already branded her skin. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the world outside blurred and gray. She paced the living room, her shadow stretching long and thin across the walls, each step echoing louder than her own thoughts. The house, normally so familiar, felt like a foreign place. Every corner whispered secrets, every silence weighed heavy. She thought of Arthur, sitting at his desk upstairs, unaware. The man she had once loved, or thought she loved, who had quietly stolen her trust, her family's security, and then layered over the theft with smug indifference. She clenched her fists, imagining the nights of sleepless fury, the words she had never spoken. Now, the box sat there, waiting, patient, its red button like a heartbeat she could almost hear. A knock at the door jolted her again. She froze, staring at the hallway. But no one was there. Just the lingering echo of footsteps she hadn't taken. Norma laughed softly, a short, bitter sound that seemed foreign even to her. She realized the knock in Section 1 wasn't just a visitor, it was a harbinger, a summons into a game she didn't fully understand yet. For hours she wrestled with the thought. She imagined pressing the button, a single act, invisible to the world, yet impossible to undo. Who would die? Who deserved it, or did it even matter? And what would happen to her afterward? The question gnawed at her, sharper than the rain tapping against the roof. Norma's mind wandered to her own reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was someone she barely recognized, hollowed cheeks, eyes too wide with anticipation and fear, lips pressed tight against words she could never speak aloud. She was aware now, with an almost painful clarity, of the emptiness that had grown in her life, not just because of Arthur, but because she had allowed herself to shrink quietly in the shadow of his indifference. That evening, Arthur returned, dripping rainwater across the hallway carpet. He smiled at her from the doorway, unaware of the storm coiled in her chest. "You've been quiet all day," he said, hanging his coat. "Everything okay?" Norma forced a smile. "Just thinking." Her voice sounded thin, too polite, too practiced. Arthur leaned closer, a habitual glance into her eyes, searching for comfort or confirmation. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The words landed like stones. She thought of betrayal, of stolen security, of years of quiet anger. For a moment, she imagined confessing everything, the fury, the longing, the life she had imagined without him. But the black box waited, a silent promise of something she couldn't speak aloud, a reckoning, a justice, a chance to reclaim the power she had surrendered for too long. Arthur turned away to hang his umbrella, and Norma's pulse quickened. She glanced at the red button, the way it caught the lamp's glow, almost imperceptibly pulsing, like it had a life of its own. The decision had not yet been made, but it no longer felt like a question of morality or prudence. It was a mirror held up to her own soul, reflecting the fury, desire, and fear she had kept buried hours past. The house grew colder, the rain heavier. Norma could feel herself trembling between restraint and surrender. Each shadow seemed to whisper, reminding her that the choice was not just about Arthur, not just about revenge, but about the woman she would become when the act was done. And in that silence, Norma realized something terrifying. Pressing the button would not just change someone else's life. It would shatter hers irreparably, leaving nothing untouched, no emotion untested. Yet the temptation, the pull toward action, was undeniable. It was not just power, it was revelation. Norma returned to the sofa and stared at the black box. The red button gleamed as if alive, calling her forward. She swallowed hard. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the moment of decision was coming. And when it did, she would either discover the truth of her courage, or the depths of her darkness. Norma sat alone in the dining room, the black box before her like a heartbeat on the table. The morning light fell in streaks across the floor, illuminating the red button in a way that seemed almost alive. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the wall clock, but nothing could drown out the storm of thoughts inside her head. Her fingers brushed the surface of the box, cold and unyielding. A shiver ran up her spine. Images began to crowd her mind, Arthur's calm, dismissive smile, the casual betrayals hidden in polite routines, the way he had always valued comfort over conscience. The rage that she had buried for years surged forward, raw and unrelenting, and then came doubt. What would it mean, to press the button? She imagined the life she could take away, the irreversible act that would leave a mark on her soul, one that no one else could see but her. Every scenario was vivid, some horrifying, some liberating. The money? Trivial. The thrill? Fleeting. The moral cost? Infinite. Norma leaned back, closing her eyes, and tried to recall the woman she had been before marriage, before disappointment, before the small betrayals of everyday life had eroded her sense of self. But that woman felt distant, almost foreign. Here, in this quiet, ordinary room, she was someone else entirely, a woman staring at a choice that would define her forever. The knock came suddenly. Sharp. Urgent. Norma's eyes snapped open. Her heart lurched. She wasn't expecting anyone. The front door swung open, and Mr. Stewart appeared, as calm and measured as ever. Rain clung to his coat, but his expression was untouched by the weather. Mrs. Lewis, he said softly, almost reverently, the moment has arrived. Norma froze. I'm not sure, doubt is natural, he said, stepping closer. But the choice does not wait. Power tests the unready, and hesitation can be as telling as action. She looked at him, then at the box, then back at him. I could hurt someone. I don't know if I can, if I should. The button, he said quietly, does not force you. It only reveals you. All else is illusion. Norma's hands shook. The air was thick, suffocating, and she felt as if the walls themselves leaned in to watch. A memory surged unbidden, Arthur laughing with his colleagues, boasting about a deal he had made at her family's expense, a deal that had left her parents humiliated and desperate. She could feel the old anger ignite, sharp and righteous, and she realized it wasn't just about the button. It was about reclaiming the life she had lost, minutes past. Then, with a trembling hand, she pressed the button, time fractured. The room seemed to fall silent, then expand outward in slow motion. Rain lashed harder against the windows. The light flickered. And then, nothing. Norma stared at the box, disbelief and fear twisting inside her. No money appeared. No sound. No change, except a subtle shift in the air, a weight that had not been there before. Mr. Stewart nodded, almost imperceptibly. The first choice has been made. The consequences will follow, though not as you expect. Some truths are felt, not seen. Norma sank into her chair, her pulse ragged, her mind a storm. Fear, relief, guilt, exhilaration, they collided in a chaotic, overwhelming wave. She had acted. She had crossed the line. And now she understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, there was no undoing it. No redemption. Only reckoning. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, Norma felt a strange, hollow calm. She had tested herself. She had discovered the truth of her own capacity. And the truth was terrifying. The storm was not over. It had only just begun. The week that followed was a blur of quiet unease. Norma moved through her home as if through water, every step heavier than the last, every sound amplified in a way that made her jump. The black box sat on the dining table, innocuous yet commanding, a constant reminder that the power to irrevocably change life and death now rested in her hands. She dared not touch it, yet she could not look away. Arthur remained oblivious, busy with his work, humming through meetings, making casual jokes about money and plans as though nothing had ever fractured between them. Norma watched him from across the kitchen, her eyes cold, calculating, her emotions tangled in a web she could barely unravel. A week ago, the rage had burned bright. Now it simmered, an insidious undertow, carrying guilt, fear, and an undeniable thrill. At night, Norma lay awake, haunted by fragments of what had happened. News reports told of accidents and sudden deaths of people tied, directly or indirectly, to Arthur's past dealings. It was impossible to know if they were connected, yet a part of her shivered with the realization, perhaps they were. Perhaps the button had already acted. The thought was intoxicating and horrifying all at once. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Arthur called her into the study. He smiled, casual, unaware. Norma, I've been thinking, maybe we should invest in that development project downtown. It's risky, but she barely heard him. Her mind raced back to the first press, the unseen consequences, the memory of the surge she had felt. And then she realized something terrifying. The button had changed her. She no longer saw Arthur as her husband. She saw him as the architect of her humiliation, the man who had stolen her dignity and left her powerless. The thrill of revenge was no longer theoretical, it had taken root, gnawing at her conscience. "I'm tired," she said softly, almost too soft to hear. "I need some air." Outside, the evening rain began again, heavy and relentless. Norma walked to the edge of the garden, the box tucked beneath her arm like a talisman of doom. She wondered, was it the box that gave power, or had the power always been inside her, waiting for an excuse to surface? A sharp knock startled her. Mr. Stewart appeared, his presence serene and unnatural, as if he had stepped out of the shadows themselves. "Mrs. Lewis," he said, voice calm, "your choices are being watched. Every hesitation, every glance toward action, leaves a trace." Norma felt her stomach tighten. "I don't know if I can do it again." "Do what?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Act with intent? Or act with vengeance?" Her voice faltered. "I can't undo what's been done. But I don't know if I should go further. The line. I don't know where it is." "There is no line," he said. "Only the reflection of who you are when faced with absolute choice. Some see restraint. Others see their darkest selves. And the reflection does not lie." Norma's fingers gripped the box tightly. Her knuckles whitened. Rain soaked her hair, dripped from her chin, mingling with tears she hadn't noticed falling. She realized she had already crossed the threshold once, but temptation, desire, and the ache of long-suppressed rage whispered for more. That night, she sat alone, staring at the button as if it were a living creature. She imagined pressing it again, just once more, and the release, the certainty, the balance it would bring. But with that thought came a horror. She could not be sure of the cost. The emptiness, the guilt, the shadow that would follow her forever. Somewhere deep inside, Norma understood, the climax was not the act itself. The climax would come from her reckoning, with her own heart, with the choices she had made, and with the irrevocable truth of who she had become. And in the quiet, rain-soaked house, Norma felt the weight of her decision press down like a tide, unstoppable and inexorable. The storm had not yet broken, but soon it would. The night was thick with rain, drumming on the roof like 1,000 anxious hands. Norma sat in the dim glow of the living room, the black box before her on the table. Her hands hovered over it, trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of inevitability. Every memory of humiliation, every stolen moment of her dignity, every quiet betrayal flashed through her mind, relentless. She thought of Arthur laughing over phone calls with colleagues, of the letters her family had sent and he had ignored, of the life she had been forced to build around his shadow. A storm raged inside her that no rain could match. Norma thought of the first press, the thrill, the chaos, the news that had come afterward. She had glimpsed power, tasted it, and it had left her both exhilarated and hollow. Now, she realized the gravity of choice, the way it burrows into the soul, shaping you, changing you irrevocably. The knock came at the door. Mr. Stewart entered silently, his presence impossibly calm, like a dark mirror of the world outside. "Mrs. Lewis," he said, voice smooth as smoke, "there is no going back. Every act is your own. Every consequence yours to bear." Norma's lips trembled. I can't undo it. But her voice broke, the enormity of the moment consuming her. "You can finish what you started," he said softly. "Or you can step away. But know this, the reflection does not lie." She stared at the button, the final act trembling in its small, cruel shape. In her mind, she saw Arthur's face, calm and unsuspecting, the man who had robbed her of trust and self-respect. And then, she saw herself, not the woman who had endured quietly, but the woman who had pressed the button once, who had unleashed chaos and felt the intoxicating release of control. Norma's fingers finally descended. The press was a whisper, a shock of motion that felt like both eternity and an instant. She waited. Time slowed. Outside, the storm's fury rose, wind rattling the windows, lightning illuminating the room in harsh white stabs. And then, silence. Her phone buzzed. The news report came in a subtle, horrifying twist. Arthur had collapsed in his study, dead from a sudden, violent heart attack. Norma's breath caught. Her pulse thundered. The room spun. She had done it. She had orchestrated the end of a life she once shared, and yet had never truly known. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with rain that had leaked in through a cracked window. She wanted to scream, to rage, to undo the irreversible. But the truth sat heavy and unshakable. She had acted, and she had felt the full, terrifying weight of her own power. The box was empty when she opened it, no money, no mechanism, only cold plastic and the echo of her decision. And then, Mr. Stewart appeared once more, his eyes unreadable, calm, and somehow knowing. The button was never about death, he said. It was about revelation. The acts you take, the choices you make, they define you. You have discovered who you are in the mirror of consequence. And now, you must live with that reflection. Norma sank to the floor, shaking, her heart pounding. In that silence, she understood, the button had never killed. It had revealed. The darkness she had harbored, the desire for justice, revenge, and control, it had always been hers. The tool, the temptation, the catalyst, it had merely exposed the truth outside. The storm began to fade, leaving an eerie, soaked calm. Norma held her face in her hands, trembling not from fear, but from the raw, unbearable clarity of choice. She was free in one sense, and utterly trapped in another. The world was unchanged, but she herself was irreversibly altered. The reflection in the empty box stared back at her, unblinking, relentless. And Norma knew, deep in her core, that she could never unsee it. The reckoning was over. She had pressed the button, and now, the truth pressed back. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening under a bruised, lavender sky. Norma sat on the edge of the sofa, the empty black box resting on the coffee table like a relic of some forgotten ritual. She traced its edges with trembling fingers, as though understanding it now required more than sight. It demanded reflection, confrontation, acceptance. The house was silent. Arthur's absence was not the quiet of sleep, but the hollow echo of finality. Norma felt it in the walls, in the floorboards, in the spaces where his presence had lingered for decades, a cold reminder that life had shifted irrevocably. She realized that the weight she had carried, not only his betrayal, but her own desire for retribution, was a burden no one else could share. Mr. Stewart appeared at the doorway, framed by the fading storm. He said nothing at first, letting the wind carry its damp scent into the room, letting Norma absorb the magnitude of what had occurred. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost intimate. You sought justice, he said. You found consequence. And now, you face the aftermath that no button, no act, no illusion can erase. The world moves on. It does not pause for morality. It does not bend for grief. Only you remain to navigate the weight of what you have done. Norma nodded, though no words could convey the storm within her. She thought of her life before the button, the quiet resentment that had festered into a subtle, insistent ache. And she thought of herself after, the woman who had dared, who had acted, who had glimpsed the raw edge of moral power and survived, but not unchanged. She wandered through the house, room by room, each space now infused with absence and memory. In the kitchen, she paused by the sink, watching the last rivulets of rain slide down the window. She imagined Arthur there, not as the man she had hated, but as a shadow of her past, a symbol of the choices that had led her here. The box, empty and innocuous, felt heavier than any man, any fortune, any betrayal ever had. It was a container of reflection, a mirror of human darkness, a reminder that power without accountability does not free, it ensnares. Norma pressed her hands to her eyes and let herself weep, not for Arthur, not for the money she would never see, but for the clarity that had cost her more than she had imagined. Outside, the first timid sunlight broke through clouds, painting the neighborhood in sharp, silvery lines. The air was wet, clean, and still, carrying with it a strange kind of promise. Norma stepped onto the porch and inhaled deeply, tasting the dawn. She was alive. She had chosen, and she had lived with that choice. Nothing could take that away, but neither could she escape the imprint it left upon her. For a long moment, she stood there, silent, staring at the horizon. Somewhere deep in her chest, a pulse of understanding stirred. Life was a series of buttons, of decisions both seen and unseen, and each pressed with intention carried echoes that would haunt, teach, or reshape. Some she could undo. Most she could not. Norma returned inside, leaving the box on the table, its empty form a testament to everything and nothing. She sat down, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the window, where light and shadow danced together. And though her heart ached with grief, guilt, and a strange, terrible liberation, she felt something else, too, the fragile, enduring ember of survival, the quiet reminder that the human soul, though tested, endures, and in that stillness, Norma understood the ultimate truth. The button had not given her power over others. It had given her power over herself, and that revelation, more terrifying and profound than any revenge, would remain with her forever. The world moved on. The house remained. And Norma, shattered, altered, and awake, finally saw herself as she truly was, a woman who had faced the darkness, pressed the button, and survived. If this story gave you chills, hit like and subscribe for more real-life emotional stories that explore the darkness and complexity of human choices. Turn on the bell to never miss a story that is stranger, darker, and more shocking than fiction, because this one is true.